Thank you.
Thank you. You'll have to excuse me, I'm not a techie now, so if this goes pear-shaped, it's not my fault. I suppose I'll go back to the very beginning of my story with Bobby. It happened roughly 6 months into my pregnancy when I had a routine scan, and they discovered that my baby's head was much larger than it should have been for the gestation time. And I was referred then to the National Maternity Hospital in Hollis Street, where there was further tests and an amniocentesis, blood tests, scans, ultrasounds, MRIs, boxes of tissues and loads of prayers. But the upshot was that Bobby had a very rare chromosomal disorder called tetrasomy 9p, which was, completely bamboozled us. We hadn't a clue. And the horrible thing about the tetrasomy 9 diagnosis was that there was very few surviving children in the world, and therefore we couldn't really predict what the prognosis was going to be. It was a huge unknown. We were referred to the chaplaincy services in the hospital, and there was a beautiful lady called Sister Eliza, some of you may remember her, who was a wealth of knowledge and strength for my husband and I. And she kind of talked us through everything, and we had 1,000,001 questions, and every time we met her we had more questions. From a parent's perspective, when you get this, when you're hit with this diagnosis of what had been up until then a perfectly normal pregnancy, you're suddenly put on a completely different track. You were preparing for this new baby. You're still preparing for a new baby, but the outlook is unknown. And she gave us great strength, and she answered all our questions, including things like, it's amazing the things that go through a parent's mind when you get this diagnosis. Things like, when the baby's born, and if he's stillborn, what happens? Do they take the baby away? Does he go for a post-mortem? Is he put in a coffin? Do you have to go out the back door of the hospital? What do I do with my other 3 children? Can they get to see him? All these questions. And they're very valid questions, and they're very real concerns for any parent who gets this bad news. So Sister Eliza was fantastic. She answered all our questions, and she said, yes, you can go through the front door of the hospital with your baby. You're not made go through a back door. And she reassured us. And one bit of knowledge that she gave us, which always sticks in my mind, is every bit of help that you are offered, to grab it with both hands. So that was in the back of our minds all the time. Even though we kind of felt, I had 3 children already. I'd kind of done the babying, the nappies, and I thought, I was a bit of a super mum, I'll be able to cope with all this. But there was the huge unknown, and for the last 2 months of my pregnancy, I'd wake up every morning waiting to feel the flutter in my bump. Was he still alive? Had he died? What was the delivery going to be like? And all these questions, and it was a surreal existence. So eventually, at 38 weeks, the team decided to bring me in and induce me so that I didn't have to do a midnight dash from Naas and try and get my other 3 children minded. So we kind of had a little bit of organisation behind the delivery. And I was brought in and induced, as I say, at 38 weeks, fully expecting to go home with a little box. So the delivery time came, and hopefully this will work. There we go. It's not the most flattering picture, but I had just been through 36 hours of labour, so you'll have to excuse the hair and makeup. But anyway, on the 15th of January 2008, Bobby made his entrance into the world, and we were absolutely thrilled. Now, we had gone through a birth plan with the hospital, and we had decided, because of the unknown, that we had a do not resuscitate order on him, because we felt that if he was only going to be with us for a few minutes, we didn't want him whisked away and poked and prodded and the jump leads and all this sort of stuff coming out. We said, if he's only with us for a few moments, we're going to cuddle him, we're going to kiss him, and we're going to give him as much of a lifetime's love in those precious few minutes. But as it happens, he decided to stick around. He must have liked the look of us. And he stuck around for 13 months. And during those 13 months, we lived a lifetime with Bobby. He spent 3 weeks in the special care unit in Hollis Street. But he actually didn't need any intervention to speak of. He didn't need oxygen. Because he was small for dates, he was only just over 5 pounds, he was NG fed. But I learned the ropes of that, and 3 weeks later we left Hollis Street through the front door. And we came home, and the other kids were absolutely thrilled to have their little brother home, and it was just so fantastic. But I wasn't naive to the road that lay ahead. Okay, he had survived birth, but he still had a lot of complications. And I knew that the road was going to be bumpy, but I kind of still felt, mum of 3, I'm going to be able to cope with this. So it became apparent after the first night, because it was taking over an hour to feed him, and he needed 3 hourly feeds. So, you know, you do the maths and you realise I was going to burn myself out very quickly. But when I had been in the special care unit, I got chatting to one of the nurses there, and she gave me the name of Jack and Jill. Now, I had known nothing about Jack and Jill up until then. But she said, there's the phone number, you might need it. And then the little voice in the back of my head, Sister Eliza, every bit of help that's offered, grab it. So I made the phone call to Jack and Jill, and it turned out to be the best phone call that I could ever have made, because Mary Jo, who's in the audience there, called out the very next day. I signed one form, and 2 days later I had a fully qualified paediatric nurse in my home helping me. It was that quick, that easy, and it was such welcome help, because you know yourself, when you're deprived of sleep, you can only function for so long before you cave in. And I, being the cornerstone and the mammy in the house, I kind of had to look after everybody. So if I went down, I'd drag everybody else with me. So just the knowing that you were going to get those respite hours, it mightn't be the next day, but maybe in 2 days' time, it kind of kept you going. You knew you were going to recharge your batteries. But it was a lot more than just respite hours. It was kind of like a roadmap, and the feeling that we can't change this, but we can get through it, and we're here to help. They helped things like what tax forms to fill in so you could get whatever entitlements, because it isn't easy trying to dial the right department. And when you're in the middle of looking after a very sick child, you don't have time to be on hold for 20 minutes to get through to the right department so you can get the right tax form, etc. Things like where to go for equipment, all those things. The Jack and Jill nurses knew it off pat, and it just made life so much easier. And we built a rapport, and some of the previous speakers spoke about continuity of care and not having to look at a different nurse every time. That's the way it was with Jack and Jill. We had one nurse who did days and another nurse that did nights. And these nurses got to know us as a family. They got to know all of our children, and the cats and the dog and the neighbours and the grannies. And they kind of nearly became like an extended part of the family. And that was so important to us. So we muddled on for a while, and things got okay, because Bobby was doing okay, and then he had a shunt fitted, and that helped matters because his head had got quite big at this stage. And we got him home, as I say, and we had the shunt fitted, and we ended up actually going on a holiday to France with him, because we kind of said, look, we can either sit around here wringing our hands going, woe is me, or we can get out there and live. So that's what we decided to do. So we bundled everybody into the car, and off we went on the Oscar Wilde ferry to France. And we had a ball. Bobby had his first taste of ice cream on Disney Avenue, Ben and Jerry's cookies and cookie dough ice cream, and he loved it. But we had a super time with the family. There you can see there's my husband and the 3 siblings. So it was a joy to have Bobby at home. And I think for any parent of a child with a life-limiting condition, it is so important that they're in the home and not in a hospital environment, as previous people said. But unfortunately, we had an infection developed in Bobby's shunt, and it had to be externalised. And it then became apparent how bad his hydrocephalus was. He was 7 kilos in weight, and he was producing 1 litre of fluid every hour. So even, I know I'm hearing a gasp in the audience, that's more than a fully grown man would produce. So it was because of the rarity of his chromosomal disorder. He was partially blind, he was almost completely deaf, his corpus callosum hadn't formed, and he had the severe hydrocephalus and some minor heart problems as well. So they decided to try a pioneering procedure to reduce the size of the nodule at the back of the brain that produces the fluid. much in the way you would blast a tumour. So the irony was that the procedure actually worked, but unfortunately Bobby suffered a severe stroke during the procedure. So after that, after the surgery, he was given a palliative diagnosis. He was no longer life-limiting, he was palliative. So he came home, and that's what I call when the SWAT team came in. Mary Jo, I don't know how she does it, she's like the swan above the water and the feet are going underneath the water, but she was pulling nurses from everywhere, all across, the Irish Cancer Society, our local hospice. They all provided nursing care because, unfortunately, we were kind of thrown a curveball in that my husband's dad, who was a normally fit and healthy man, had an accident, fell down the stairs and broke his neck and died. This was on Valentine's Day the 14th, and he was buried on the Thursday, and Bobby died on the Saturday morning. So it was a bit of a crazy time in the Priestley household in Naas. But I remember the morning really well because we had just recovered from burying Bobby's granddad, and we were sitting at home, and we kind of said, we knew that what was coming down the tracks, and we knew Bobby was very seriously ill. So my husband, who had been dealing with an undertaker for his father, said, look, do you know what, we might as well speak to the undertaker, because when the balloon goes up, we don't know how we're going to be emotionally, and we might want to do things and forget to do them when you're hit with grief. So a very pleasant local undertaker called out to the house, and we ran through, the procedure of the funeral and hymns, and we had our plan in place. And little did we know that the very next day we were going to be putting that plan into action. But that Saturday morning, one of my close friends was down with us, and she had taken the children up to the park to play. And the nurse that was there at the time kind of said to us, I think it's time. And so Bobby was a very tactile baby because of the hearing and the sight deficiencies. So he loved to be up in your arms. He spent his whole life up in somebody's arms, be it the kids or us. He slept in the middle of us in the bed, and he was very much cuddled and loved. But he used to love when I'd sing to him. So my husband cuddled him in his arms, and I put my cheek next to his, and I sang a little song to his favourite song, which is Edelweiss, and I sang that to him, and he just took one last breath, and it was extremely peaceful. Now, I know you're probably saying, how can she stand up there and talk about that? But in my mind, I was given a gift, because when you think about it, everybody in this room is going to die. Now, our gift was that we were able to plan and prepare ourselves for Bobby's death with the intervention of the palliative care system, because I certainly, when I go, I'd love to be cuddled by somebody that I love, with somebody singing to me. When you think about the horrible things that are happening around the world with natural disasters and terrorism and other things like that, sometimes life has just gone like that. When you have a palliative diagnosis, you're in a position to plan, and nobody likes to talk about their own death, but I certainly have made my wishes known, and I certainly want to go in the arms of somebody that I love. I don't want it to be in a hospital, I want it to be at home. After Bobby died, we were given fantastic services in terms of bereavement. The Jack and Jill Foundation had a meeting for families who had lost children in the previous 12 months, and we got to meet other families, and the children got to meet other kids, which another speaker spoke about, which is so important, that they realise they're not the only ones that had a dead little brother or sister, and that was really good for them. And then Hollis Street had a memorial service that November, and my husband, who's an army officer, they gave us the services of an army psychologist. So there was people, and again, Sister Eliza's voice in the back of our head, every piece of help that's given, grab it with both arms, and that's what we did. So I suppose why I'm here today is to sort of pay tribute to Bobby, and to share my story from the other side of the fence, of you guys working on the medical and clinical side of it. I'm sort of on the receiving end of it. But I think it's very important that I let you know that not once in Bobby's short life and all the hospital visits and treatments that he had was he ever treated any way different to a child who was in the full of their health, even though he had a life-limiting condition. We never once felt that he wasn't getting the same care as any other child, which is, the healthcare system comes in for a lot of bad press, but from my point of view, they could have done no more for my child. They were absolutely fantastic. We were never made feel that just because he had a life-limiting condition that they weren't going to try everything that they could for him, which is hugely important, and I think it should be acknowledged that the team in Crumlin were absolutely fantastic, and in Hollis Street as well. Just a couple of things though, they're very, very much under-resourced. I was given the news that my child would probably die in a little side room where they give bloods, pass bloods up a chute in Hollis Street. When I was in the ICU unit with Bobby, when they had done some tests to find out the extent of his deafness and blindness and that, there was no room beside the intensive care unit. There's no bad news room up there. The doctor had to ask somebody in an administrative role to step away from their computer for a few minutes so that he could give me the news. So there are areas where we could improve, and it's not in the staffing, it's in the infrastructure. So in terms of, I was thinking about what I was going to say to everybody today, and it comes back to what I was talking about, planning and palliative care, and that our family certainly look at it as a gift because we were able to manage and sort of to a degree control Bobby's passing. He was not in pain, and that's the biggest concern to parents, is that their child is in pain, because nobody wants to be in pain as an adult, and you definitely don't want to see your child in pain. So I think pain management is a huge and crucial part of palliative care, and I think once a parent can accept to a degree that their child is going to pass away, but they don't want them roaring in pain as they do so. So I think pain management it was nearly a relief when I was given the palliative diagnosis for Bobby, because it meant that they weren't trying to find a line on him anymore to try in vain and try to prod his little arms to try and get access. This was all gone now. He was just going to be given pain relief, and that was a huge relief to me as a mum. And when you think about it, we put a huge amount of resources into childbirth and all the research and antenatal classes and all this sort of thing to do with birth. Everybody's born, but equally everybody's going to die. So our palliative services should be certainly looked at in greater detail for both adults and children, and it should be adequately resourced so that everybody can pass from this world where possible in the way of their choosing. That's kind of really what I wanted to say. And another aspect is the grey area that exists between a child with a life-limiting condition and a child with a palliative diagnosis. Now, things have improved greatly since 2009, but I remember when I applied for a medical card for Bobby, he had a primary cert, so you know how ill you have to be to have a primary cert, but he was denied a medical card. So I know things have improved, but I think that you shouldn't have to wait for that palliative diagnosis to be entitled to a medical card. I think, it is a grey area, and certain children will dip in to palliative care and then come out of it again and just be life-limiting. So, these things can happen very quickly. So I think, if going forward, that's an area that could be explored. And as I said, my legacy to Bobby is being part of the... There he is there. You probably recognise the ward in Crumlin. That's his big brother. That's his close protection team, as he used to call himself. He was always, as I say, up in somebody's arms. But it's to resource. I've lost my train of thought there for a minute. To resource fully the palliative care end of things, and I was delighted to be asked to become the parents' representative on the National Development Committee, and I hope that in my almost 4 years there that I have contributed in some way, because at the end of the day it's parents and families that we're dealing with, they're not numbers, and certainly my experience with Bobby has been completely positive in terms of what was available in palliative care. There's his gorgeous little Fisher-Price glasses. He was just about 1 there now, and they were trying to get him to. And there, this was unfortunately towards the end. You can see he looks quite ill there, but we had a little bean bag, which was great. If anybody's dealing with babies who are palliative, a bean bag is brilliant because the child doesn't get lumps and bumps and soreness of a bed. So a bean bag is great, and it means that the other children can get down and cuddle up close. And yeah, there he wasn't well there at all. And there he was waked at home. So that was hugely important to me as a parent, that Bobby didn't have to go off to a mortuary. He didn't have to get a post-mortem. The undertaker took him away for about half an hour and then came back with the little coffin, which was put in our bay window there. And every time I turned around, there was more teddies. All his little friends from the road were coming in, and it was their first time for a lot of them seeing a dead body. But they were, kids are gassed, just, oh yeah, there's Bobby, and they'd go up and sort of have a little look or a little poke, But kids are a lot more resilient than we give them credit for. But, in as much as a palliative experience can be good, ours was the best. And this is my legacy to Bobby, is to be up here talking to you all today and giving you a little insight into Bobby and Bobby's world. And I can say with huge confidence that he lived a lifetime in his 13 months, and I would like to thank every person who was involved in his care, and thank you all very much for listening to me.